On this day in 1896, Walter Paepcke was born. Raised in Chicago by a family that encouraged him to appreciate the arts and humanities, he took over his father's lumber business and turned it into one of the most successful packaging companies in the world. He was a successful industrialist, a loving husband and father, and a generous patron of the arts. But something was missing until his beloved Elizabeth introduced him to a rundown silver mining town in Colorado.
This beautiful small village, which had slept like Sleeping Beauty from the time of the fall of the silver dollar, and it didn't wake up until Walter came.
At that time, we thought it would be very interesting if it would be possible to have a renaissance of that type of community where the only three parts of man's life, namely the economic, the cultural, educational, and the physical, could all be enjoyed without having to go far afield.
And so Walter went to work fixing up the town. He knew that this place was special, and he knew people would come to enjoy the skiing, fishing, and beautiful scenery. But he also knew it needed to be more than that. There had to be something to scratch the proverbial itch he had to further humanity.
He went to Walter Paepcke because he knew that Walter was devoted to Goethe. In fact, my early memory of Walter was that he could recite whole passages from the Faust in German, eloquently and well. And said, Walter, why don't we have this in Aspen?
The Goethe Bicentennial Convocation set the roadmap for the future of Aspen. It would be a place where culture thrived, luminaries gathered, and music rang out from every corner.
At the end of that convocation, a petition was passed around by many of the public and also the participants, urging that this may not be allowed to die with one summer, but that there would be a continuing summer activity of an educational and cultural sort. Therefore, the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies was founded in the fall of 1949.
All these years later, here we are, living out the dream that Walter had envisioned. So today, on what would be Walter's 129th birthday, we celebrate him. Happy birthday, Walter. Thanks for everything.
Good morning, everybody. What a wonderful way to spend Sunday morning with all of you out here in the beautiful mountains. It is my privilege to introduce Jonathan Haidt this morning. I first met Jonathan about 6 years ago when I was on the board of Teach for America, and he came out to San Francisco to one of our meetings to speak to that group about his earlier book, The Coddling of the American Mind. Since then, I've been following his work, and then recently had the pleasure of leading a conversation with him and our governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. We live in Arkansas. And at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, an American art museum that I have the great privilege of being the chair of, which I invite everyone in this room to come to anytime they want. Jonathan's work has profoundly shaped how I think about raising my children, how we, my husband Tom is here in the front row, how we think about raising our children. It has changed how I think about technology, and it has changed how I think about human connection. In The Anxious Generation, which has now been on the bestseller list for 62 weeks, Jonathan gives language to what so many of us, especially moms, have been sensing for years. This sense that childhood today is full of overstimulation, isolation, and often more full of anxiety than play, calm, and connection. So today, John is going to walk us through the core arguments and research of his book, and then we're going to spend some time pushing back on those ideas and talking about some of the potential solutions and roadblocks and sort of how this all shows up in the work. Now, or how this all shows up in the world. In Arkansas, it is already showing up in the world. So when Governor Sanders read The Anxious Generation, she was so moved that she sent a copy to every governor in the country, and she sent a copy of The Anxious Generation to every single state legislator in Arkansas. She was inspired to offer pilot money to support phone pouches, lockers for your phones, funds to coordinate telehealth and mental health support. And the response was overwhelming. 75% of our school districts in Arkansas actually applied. I live in Bentonville, Arkansas. One of our high schools, Bentonville West, was one of our phone-free pilot schools. And within 1 year, the results were extraordinary. Drug use dropped 51%. Violent and disruptive behavior fell by 57%. And over 80% of teachers said the program transformed student engagement. But this is more than about just phones. It's about the kind of childhood we want for our children. And as we say at Aspen, it is about the kind of good society we all want to build. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Haidt.
Well, thank you so much, Olivia. That visit, because this was just actually it was, I guess, November that we had that visit. But to come out to Arkansas and to see what they were doing in Bentonville, where you have a philanthropic family that already is working on so many quality of life issues in Bentonville and bike paths everywhere, outdoor life. And then you have a governor who was also one of the first out of the blocks, went in big. And so to see, it was like that visit, like, wow, this is actually happening. So it was just thrilling, and thank you for that beautiful introduction and for all you've done, you and your family have done for this movement. I was also very touched by the opening video of Walter Paepcke, because this place is very special for me and my family. Actually, I don't know, are my children here? Max and Francesca, are you here? They usually avoid my talks. They say they're sick of it. But the reason why I bring it up is because 10 years ago I brought my family when they were 5 and 8. And this is the very first place that they ever had full independence. That is, my wife and I said, doors open, we'll see you in a few hours. And what do? You run around to all the snack centers, all the drinks, like they just loved it. It was so amazing for them. But my wife and I, we'd see them just like running around like on those little mounds, those hills by the meadows. So this, Walter Paepcke's vision of this kind of environment just has been important for my family. So thank you to the whole Aspen community. Now I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes because I think it's helpful to lay out some of the findings, some of the data, and some of the dynamics that are well illustrated visually. And I picked this very depressing title because I want to kind of shock everyone and make you realize this is so much bigger than I thought it was when I wrote the book. Like what I've learned since the book came out is that the things that are changing are so much bigger than I had realized. But my chief of staff, Alexa, warned me like, John, you've got to at least put an asterisk, but don't worry because we can stop it. Like, I've got to give you some hopes. Let me give you that up front. Because of all the giant problems we face, this one we can actually solve. It's totally bipartisan, and it costs hardly any money to solve it. So you'll see it ends very optimistically. But the metaphor I want to give you to really understand the depth of the change, of the sort of the human change we've been going through, I want you to think about tree roots. Trees are very good metaphors for neurons. They even really look like neurons, with the axons and the dendrites. And so this tree, clearly, as it sent out its roots, the roots grew structured by the environment. These roots could sense where water was, and they grew out along that, okay? Here's another example of trees. Trees are amazing things. This tree grew up behind a Civil War era tombstone, and I presume the tombstone scraped the bark, and then the tree ended up growing around the tombstone. So think of slow growth of organic systems. Right. Now think of the neurons in a child's brain as that child is growing up. Is this child growing up running around in the natural world, or is this child growing up sedentary on a screen? Is that going to affect neural growth? Of course it will. We know this because look what it's doing to our bodies. Think about children going through puberty. Their bones are growing, and they always have a phone in their hand. And there's at least an internet rumor going around, I haven't checked it with medical authorities, that people who, it's called TikTok pinky, that their left pinky is bent. I don't know if that's literally medically true, but it's quite plausible because it's happening to all of us. I have a pinched nerve in my neck right now. I'll never know whether it's from hunching over. But this is happening to adults, it's happening to kids. Our phone-based life is literally changing our skeletons. We know that it's changing eyeballs of younger people. There's been a global increase in myopia, and it is because kids are spending so much time indoors on close screens, not outdoors with long views. It is known that this is related to smartphone use. Kids who use smartphones more have more myopia. So it is literally changing our eyes. And this is a photo of an actual Gen Z brain, which I got from Midjourney or one of the AI programs. So nobody was hurt in the making of this slide. But in a very real sense, there are two major periods of brain growth. It's prenatally and the first 2 years, then it slows down, then it speeds up at puberty. And so if you go through puberty on a smartphone, your brain will, in a almost literal sense, grow around the smartphone. And I think that's what's happened. That's what's happening to humanity. Our brains, especially for people born after 1995, so if you're born in 1996 or later, you're Gen Z. And for Gen Z, around the developed world at least, I think this is what's happening. So this is the story that I tell in my book. The central historical fact is the great rewiring of childhood, which is a tragedy in 2 acts. So in Act 1, we lose the play-based childhood. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this, but beginning in the 1990s, a little in the 80s too, but it really accelerates in the 90s, we start thinking that if we ever take our eyes off our kids, they're going to be abducted. They're going to be kidnapped. If they go to another aisle in the supermarket, they're going to be kidnapped. So we don't give them any independence. That begins in the 1990s. But kids aren't getting depressed then. There's no change in the levels of depression and anxiety in the 90s and the early 2000s. It's not until we get to Act 2 that we really see this incredibly rapid, radical change. Act 2 of the tragedy is that the phone-based childhood comes storming in a very short period of time, just 5 years. Childhood changes radically, and I'll go through that in a moment. I can summarize the whole book with this sentence. We have overprotected our children in the real world, and we have underprotected them online. Wow, I'm guessing this is an audience full of parents who are rooting for me. Okay. Okay. I won't even comment. It's my friend Bill. I shouldn't humiliate him in front of the rest of the audience. Okay, so the rest of my talk is structured around just going through the incredible depth of the harms. If you care about kids, if you care about society, if you care about economic prosperity, if you care about mental health, if you care about boys, if you care about girls, this is what I think is happening. And then we'll go through the solutions. So I've already told you just a few of the physical harms. So now let's move on to the mental illness. So this is what first caught my attention when I was writing The Coddling of the American Mind with my friend Greg Lukianoff. That started in 2014, 2015. We could see that college students suddenly were much more anxious and depressed, much more threat sensitive. And since that book came out, we've gathered a lot more data. This is data from American University health centers, all collated by UCLA has a center on this. And what we see here are the rates of various disorders, the reasons why college students walk into the counseling center. What's the complaint? And these were the rates of various things until 2010. And in all the things I'm going to show you, there's really nothing going on before 2010, even 2011. There's no sign of a change, but then this happens. And in just a few years, things go up, especially anxiety and depression. It's internalizing disorders, the things where you turn your emotions inward, you make yourself miserable, especially anything related to anxiety or depression. So at first we just thought it was college students. But then we found out that no, it's actually everybody. And I'm skipping a lot of slides here, you'll see them in the book. But it's everybody, it's teenagers. If you were born after 1996, you were much more likely to get depressed and anxious in the early 2010s. Some of my critics say, oh, it's just that Gen Z is so comfortable talking about it. There's no stigma. That's a good thing. They're honest. That's good. But if that was the case, then we would not see changes in behavior. We would only see changes in self-report. Where you see the biggest, the most gigantic, mind-blowing changes is whenever you zoom in on 10 to 14-year-old girls. Whatever it is that happened, it was like a missile targeting right at 10 to 14-year-old girls. And so this is the number per 100,000 of 10 to 14-year-old girls who, actually this is emergency room visits. They came into an emergency room for self-harm. They harmed themselves. And so the rates were very low. This is not something that 10 to 14-year-old girls used to do. And then we get into this period. 10 to 14-year-old girls now they cut themselves as much as 16-year-old girls used to 20 years ago. And what really sort of grabbed me and made me realize I have to drop my other work. I was writing a book on what social media is doing to democracy. What made me realize, no, that's actually not so important compared to this, was when we discovered it's not just the US. That it's wherever these are the parts of the world where we have good longitudinal data, and we find it everywhere. Eastern Europe is a little different for complicated reasons, but across the developed Western world, we find the same patterns that I've been showing you. So just one graph in Great Britain, very different data set, but this also is doctor-diagnosed self-harm episodes. Again, no trend before 2010, and then this happens. It's as though someone somewhere turned on a light switch, and all of a sudden, teenage girls started cutting themselves and getting committed to psychiatric emergency wards. Now, why? Why is this happening? With a similar pattern around the world, same timing. Why? If this was just America, everyone would have their theory. People would blame it on Obama, probably, or they would, in 2012 there was the Newtown massacre. There was a horrible school shooting, and after that, all our kids had these terrifying lockdown drills. So it was just America. There's so many things. Correlation doesn't prove causation. There's so many things but the fact that it happened all over the Western world means it wasn't Obama or Newtown. What was it? Here's my theory. No one else has even proposed an alternative. I keep looking, I keep asking. No one can come up with an explanation for why it happened at the same time in the same way in so many countries, other than the Great Rewiring theory. So let me illustrate it for you. If you were, let's see, raise your hand if you were born between 1981 and 1995. Raise your hand high. Okay, so you're all millennials, and what that means is that you went through puberty in the 1990s or the early 2000s, and you probably had, just call it out if you know what brand this is, this phone. Right, it was a widely beloved or widely used, okay? So this was millennials' world. It was a tool, it was a communication tool. You use it to call or text your friends or your family. Or to play Snake, right? That's the thing that millennials always remember, Snake. There was a game on it. So there was no attention economy in your pocket, just communication. But what if you were born in the year 2000? What happened? Well, you start going through puberty around 2012, 2013, and you go through puberty on a smartphone. Because even though it comes out in 2007, it's only 2012, 2013, it's right there that everyone's rushing onto it. That's also the year that Facebook buys Instagram. And they don't change it at first, but the marketing, the attention, so that's when 10 to 14-year-old girls start not gossiping and talking in small groups, but posting and commenting. And because this thing is always in your pocket, the entire world can get to you. Companies can market to you. Everyone can interrupt you. And so now we have an attention economy in which these children were not the customers. They weren't paying anything. They were the product. And the customers were the advertisers who were paying Meta to get as much of their attention as they could extract. So I call it the Great Rewiring, but it's really, visually to convey what was childhood like? What did it used to be like? And it used to be full of adventures and risk. And a lot of you remember, if an extraterrestrial shows up in your neighborhood, you and your friends, you put him in a basket, you have adventures. It's just what we did. But what is childhood now? It's very solitary. And if you're a boy, you literally cannot go over to your friend's house because then you can't play with each other. If you want to play with your friends, you have to go home to your controller, your headset, your avatar, and then you can play with your friends. And we have a lot of data on time use. You see, time with friends used to be very high for young people, and it begins dropping in the 2000s. As soon as they get their smartphones, they spend less and less time with each other. It's now down to about 50 minutes a day outside of school on average. But even that 50 minutes includes this. So there's just not much time that they're interacting with each other face-to-face anymore. These devices are too seductive. They are designed by geniuses with degrees in psychology who studied behaviorism and know exactly the optimum timing and pattern for dopamine stimulation to create maximum addiction. So that's why it's happening. Now let me tell you what I think is the biggest cost. When I started writing the book, I thought it was going to be all about social media for girls and anxiety depression, because that's what's clearest in the data. And even when I was writing the book, the subtitle is How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. Okay, so this is huge, an epidemic of mental illness. But what I've discovered since the book came out is that is not the largest damage. There's a much bigger one, which I believe is attention fragmentation. The destruction of the human ability to pay attention, to think, to read books, to focus. Because this isn't just hitting 20 or 30% of our kids the way mental illness is. This is hitting almost all of us, including us adults. So a year and a half ago, Derek Thompson, a wonderful science journalist or all-around journalist at The Atlantic, wrote this article. It sure looks like the phones are making students dumber. And he was writing this because test scores were coming in. This is America's report card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And what you see here is that we made progress. Slow, it's not huge increases, but we literally made our students better educated from 1970 through 2012. And this is despite strong headwinds like the decline of marriage and all kinds of other obstacles, but we did it. Our educational system actually got slowly and gradually better until 2012. And then this happens. Now, this graph gets everyone's attention because all the news around it was, look at the COVID drop. Look what COVID did. COVID. But the drop didn't start in 2020. It started in 2012. Now, if we dig deeper into the data, we see even more evidence that this is not COVID. So some experts predicted a post-COVID recovery, and if we look, this is where you break up the data. This is just the math scores for 8th graders, and if you look at the top, the students who score best, the top 20 or 25% on these tests, they do show a small post-COVID bounce. You can see that. Scores went down when schools were closed, but now they're back for a couple of years. They're getting a little better, a bit of a post-COVID recovery. But what happens to the bottom 50%? They started dropping around 2015. They started dropping as soon as everything moved on to smartphones. Oh, and the Chromebooks and the iPads. Constant distraction. The very best students can resist the distraction, but most students, the majority of students, cannot. And they began dropping after 2015 or so. We see the same pattern when we look at reading scores. I'm just showing you two of the many things I could show you. But once again, we see that on the top, we don't really see a decline, but on the bottom half of the country, we see a decline that wipes out 50 years of progress. 50 years of educational gains gone. And it's not just us. This is PISA, the Program for International Scholastic Assessment. So this is sort of the Globe's report card. And once again, we see no trend in scores before 2010, and then scores drop all over the world. This is what began to freak me out and get me talking in these terms like mass destruction of human capital. This is the mass destruction of human capital. Now, why is this happening? It's kind of obvious. To learn, you have to pay attention. If you're watching TikTok, video games, and porn all day in class, you're probably not going to learn a lot of math. And the number of interruptions that everyone gets, but especially teens, is in the hundreds per day, and about a quarter of them come during school. it's also caught our attention. We university professors who've been assigning reading for decades, we now find our students are having a lot of trouble reading books, even at the elite schools. And so this, I talked about this with my students. I teach a course at NYU Stern called Flourishing. And I talked about this article with them. And one of my students said, yeah, it's true. She said, I open a book, I read a sentence, I get bored, I go to TikTok. But as we see over and over again, the technology companies cause major disruptive problems, but then they offer a solution, a tech solution. So my students told me about PDF to brain rot. So here's how it works. Here's an article that I wrote with Jean Twenge. Suppose I assigned this article to my students. Well, it's boring. They're going to have to pay attention for, 20, 30 minutes. There's no, nothing lighting up. Nothing's really happening. It's boring. No problem, my student told me. You just go to PDF to brain rot. You drag the file, the PDF that I assigned, drag it, drop it there. Then you pick the background video because now there's stuff happening. You can pay attention. So in this case, my kids used to play Subway Surfer, so I picked Subway Surfer. Now note, you're not playing Subway Surfer. You're just watching someone else play it, okay? And here's what it looks like.
Global trends in adolescent loneliness. Ski bit I boom. The world is feeling the goon vibes of loneliness hitting teens. From 2012 to 2018, almost every country saw a spike in school loneliness, especially among girls. It is like a Sigma grinds that gone wrong, with social media and smartphones turning friendships into toilet bowl reflections of despair.
Okay, I think that's enough. You get the idea. And so again, the ability to read a book, executive function, the ability to decide you're going to stay on something, even though you know that there are other more interesting things elsewhere. That is a crucial skill, especially in an advanced economy. We're training people for careers that are going to require them to focus, and we're destroying the ability to focus. Now, what then sort of upped my worry about this another level was this article in the FT a few months ago, where John Byrne Murdoch brought together a few studies. This is the Monitoring the Future study, one I showed you earlier. But I didn't realize this. Nestled within that, there's a bunch of questions about how hard it is for you to think. And so in the past 30 days, what percentage of the time have you had a difficulty thinking or concentrating? And there's a slight rise from 1990 to 2010. And how often have you had trouble learning new things? No rise at all. And then this happens. Now, this is self-report. Students are saying that they have a lot of trouble thinking. I think we should listen to them. I mean, raise your hand if you're a teacher in any way in this room. Okay. Have you noticed a decline in their ability to pay attention? Everyone is noticing it. But what Byrne Murdoch did was he found this study that I hadn't heard of where they actually gave adults math problems and they scored them. And they've been doing this for a long time. And they gave them several pages of text to read. And then they had to answer questions about it. And what this graph shows is the percentage who were functionally illiterate or innumerate. So if you look especially at the light blue lines, what you see is that in the US, it was about 18% of American adults couldn't answer simple questions about a few pages of text. But no change before 2012. And then this happens. So all around the world, or at least where we test here, adults are literally less able to solve math problems. They are literally less able to read a few pages. As Byrne Murdoch put it, we appear to be looking less at the decline of reading per se and more at a broader erosion in the human capacity for mental focus and application. Once again, a gigantic destruction of human capital and human potential, hitting potentially all human beings, not just those born after 1995. So this is what has me incredibly alarmed. We are literally getting stupider at the exact time that our machines are getting much, much smarter. We're kind of giving up. I mean, Team Humanity is kind of saying, we concede, you guys take it. So that's attention fragmentation. That, I think, is the biggest thing that is going to alter the course of human history unless we stop it. Just briefly, I just want to, another thing I've learned since writing the book, I've learned a lot more about what's happening to boys. We have a chapter in the book, chapter 7, which goes into it with a lot of reference to Richard Reeves' wonderful book of Boys and Men. And so here's the basic contrast. For girls, the story really does center on social media. That is just devastating. Take all the worst parts about being a girl in middle school and quadruple them. That's what life on social media does to girls. The evidence of this link is very clear. So this is what I thought was the main story of the book. And that is the main story, I believe, for girls. There's a lot of other stuff going on elsewhere, but this is the main place to look. For boys, it wasn't so clear. I was thinking, well, is it going to be video games? Do video games do the bad things to boys equivalent? And so, some definitely, but it's not as focal. It took me a while to realize this, but the key for boys is everything. Everything that these companies can now do to our boys to grab their dopamine circuits. Every way that they can possibly put our boys on a variable ratio reinforcement schedule is being done to them. So it begins with the video games. And we know from people in the industry, they literally design them to be addictive. They literally do everything they can to keep the boys on the game so that they don't go to the competitor's game. So it starts with the video games. Now, I don't want to say, almost all kids, and especially boys, play video games. I'm not saying don't let your kids play video games. But 2 or 3 hours a day, every day, that's a lot of stimulation of the dopamine circuits, which means that the brain downregulates those neurons so that it now takes more stimulation to get you up to feeling normal. Which is why for boys who spend their day on this, everything off screen is now more boring than it was 20 years ago. It's harder to pay attention to the real world. But it just starts there, then it moves on to porn, it moves on. I'm now looking at, e-cigarettes, vaping, marijuana pens. So many of our young men in particular are dosing themselves with things that stimulate dopamine, not for doing anything important in the world, not for doing anything hard, but just for triggering your dopamine neurons. It feels good. And then it goes on. As they get a little older, it becomes sports betting. My God, sports used to be a positive pastime for boys. Now it's just another profit center for a bunch of companies. And even investing, when our boys are old enough to open investment accounts, it's all gamified. The net effect, and Richard Reeves just told me this recently, in states that legalize sports betting, the number of bankruptcies goes way up. I forget the percentage he said for young men, but this is especially crippling for young men. And so we're raising a generation of boys who can't concentrate, can't focus, and won't be able to accumulate money. How are they going to do in the modern economy? How are they going to find a spouse? This, I think, is the story for boys. And I didn't even touch yet on all the things that happen, the extremism, the manosphere, the recruitment online into extremist and violent and hateful ways of being. And this is from the Netflix series Adolescence, for those of you who haven't seen it. So that concludes the darkest part of our tour. Now, here's the amazing thing. Have you ever heard, first of all, have you ever heard a talk this dark? Raise your hand okay. So no, this is like the darkest talk you can ever hear. But have you ever seen a major problem that could be solved for almost no money and it's totally bipartisan? No, you haven't. I know that because there aren't any others. This is it. Here's the key. The key is that we're all stuck in a series of collective action problems. The reason we had to give our kids a phone in 5th or 6th grade is because they say, Mom, I'm the only one. Everyone else has an iPhone. I'm being left out. And that pulls at our heartstrings and we give in. And the companies know this and they play on it. And so the way out of a collective action problem is collectively. If you try to escape by yourself, you can do it. And some heroic parents are doing it, and they're putting a cost on their kids, which in the long run is good for the kids, but the kids have to pay the cost. But if you're not alone, if you've got 5 other families doing it with you, or if you've got your whole school, then it's easy to escape. So here are the 4 norms. I'll run through them. The first is no smartphone before high school. I'm not saying that it's perfectly safe in 9th grade. What I'm saying is this is a bright line. How about we just draw a bright line and we say, middle school, hands off. Middle school is the toughest period. Let them get through middle school in the real world with each other. And then we'll worry about, we'll worry about helping high school kids control usage. But we can't expect 10-year-olds to do this. So before then, give a flip phone, a basic phone, a phone watch, but there must be no internet. What I'm coming to see, I didn't know this when I wrote the book, iPad turns out to be just as bad. It's not quite as portable, but it does all the same stuff. And 40% of our 2-year-olds now have their own iPad, according to one survey. It's an amazingly powerful digital pacifier, just like opium. But we don't give opium to our kids to stop them from whining. We give them iPads. A laptop, you're going to have to give at some point, or access to a computer, I should say. It's not as addictive. It's really the touch screen is the worst of the worst. So there's a lot more to say about laptops, but I just want to notice, I just want you to note, it's really the touch screens to keep your eye on, also video game consoles. The second norm that we need to break out of a collective action trap is no social media before 16. If a bunch of people in your 5th grade class are getting Instagram and they're talking about you, the pull to get on is very, very strong. And of course, all our kids could open fake accounts without us ever knowing. So the companies have put us in an impossible situation. We literally cannot raise our kids the way we want. It is just not possible unless you literally keep them away from the internet. So what we need, I was assuming we'd have to do this as a norm because I thought we'll never raise the age by law. So I proposed as a norm that we all hold out and not let them open accounts until they're 16, let them get through early puberty. Yes, they'll miss out on some things, but if they spend 5 hours a day on social media, they'll miss out on a lot more. The third norm is phone-free schools, which is going gangbusters. It's going so well. And here, the numbers that Olivia gave, it's really stunning the way behavior improves and happiness improves. And the fourth norm is far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. And we happen to have Lenore Skenazy in the audience. Lenore, please stand up. She wrote the book Free Range Kids. She really helped. Lenore really helped me and my family, my wife Jane, to raise our kids, to do things like let them run around at Aspen, let them have run of the place. We wouldn't have done that if we hadn't known Lenore and worked with her. So at Let Grow, Lenore and Camilla are giving a talk today at 4:30, at 4 o'clock in a big building. In East Lawn. So I hope you'll go see that. But there are all kinds of ways to give your kids more independence, especially the Let Grow experience. I don't have time to go into it, but it basically encourages kids to do something on their own with your permission, but not with you. And there's their talk. And so to conclude, we're starting a movement. I mean, mothers around the world have started lots of organizations. The movement was brewing, but it's been supercharged by having this book in common, a set of common norms to aim for. So if you go to anxiousgeneration.com, that's the central hub for resources. Our mission is to reverse the two acts of the tragedy, give kids back a childhood in the real world. Every single state is at least considering legislation along some of these norms. 11 or 12 states have already enacted fully phone-free schools. So it's happening around the country and around the world. Parents, especially mothers, are organizing. President Macron just announced he's going to push for raising the age for social media in Europe, and if the EU won't do it, he'll do it in France. Brazil's schools are all phone-free, so it's been amazing to watch this happening. Alexa Arnold is my chief of staff, who's now running the movement. Alexa, if you just stand up for a moment. So if you want to be a part of it, if you want to help us build a team to bring this nationally and globally, please come talk to Alexa afterwards or later here at Aspen. And so I hope you'll join us. Here are the sites at which you can find all of the information. But really, together, we can reclaim childhood in the real world. Thank you.
Wow, that is so compelling. I almost feel silly pushing back, but as Dan Porterfield said last night, this is Aspen, so we got to give you a little bit of a hard time. Tell me more about this is correlation, not causation. A lot of other things started at that time, the overparenting, yes, the gun violence, changes in the way we talk about anxiety, economic stress, political polarization, climate anxiety. How can you be so sure?
So Meta, in particular, is extremely active in trying to control the narrative. They fund a lot of organizations. They give money to the Girl Scouts, the PTA, scientific organizations. Meta's whole defense against the thousands of parents who are suing them because their kids are dead, their whole defense is, oh, this is just correlation, not causation. So very briefly, there are two different kinds of correlation. There's a historical correlation, as you were just pointing out. This happened, then this happened. And we all know you can't say, therefore, this caused that. But since there is no other theory on the table, this becomes the leading hypothesis. There's also a correlation where kids who use social media a lot are more mentally ill than kids who don't. And they say, well, that's just because kids who are mentally ill just really like using Instagram, which hardly seems like much of an endorsement, but that's their argument. That's their argument. That's what their legal defense hinges on. But guess what? There are so many other kinds of evidence. I've been gathering all these different kinds of evidence. Let's go just very, very briefly. There are also experiments. That's our gold standard in science. If you, one experiment in Stanford, actually, right, your brother or brother-in-law was just telling me about this, where they had people delete social media from their phones for a while. Just
they were paying them.
They were paying them, right? It was an experiment. They were randomly assigned. And when they spent 3 or 4 weeks off of, they didn't have it on their phones, they were less anxious, they were happier, they spent more time outdoors, more time with friends. So we have experiments. We also have eyewitness testimony. The kids themselves say, when you ask them, why is your generation so anxious and depressed? And they say, he did it. They point to social media. So we have eyewitness identification. Oh, we also have confessions. You ask the people who made the technology, do you let your kids use this? Hell no, it's bad for them. And we have that from their internal communications. We have all kinds of documents from the lawsuits. They know exactly what they're doing. They are doing it deliberately. So, the people who say, oh, Haidt has no evidence, I've got like 7 different kinds of evidence that this is harming our kids. They have no plausible alternative story.
Hey, I believe you. That's weird. Some might also say, hey, we've seen this moral panic before. This happened when TV came out. This happened when video games came out. Why is this different?
Yeah, and that's a good one. And that should always be our first thought. Whatever the older generation is always freaks out, whatever new technology the kids are using. That's a very legitimate complaint. Here's the difference, though. If we look at, say, comic books, that's like the classic moral panic.
No one's going to read again.
Well, it's like, violent comic books. The kids will be violent. And there was a kid who read a comic book about axe murdering, and then he axe murdered his mother. Okay, that would be an urban myth. That would be spread somewhere. That's what a previous moral panic is, spread through the media. Mm-hmm. This is not that. People aren't freaking out about what social media is doing to their kids because they read something about John Haidt or Jean Twenge saying it's bad. This is because they see it themselves, or they see it in their nieces and nephews. So this is not like a previous moral panic. People see it. This is not just rumors. Also, in the comic book moral panic, the kids weren't organizing and saying, please, comic book companies, please stop making your comic books so addictive. But Gen Z is organizing to protest, to push back against the design, these addictive designs. So it's a perfectly good objection, and I've got some pretty good answers for it.
What do you think is the strongest or most interesting critique you've received about your work?
What's really, those two, it's the moral panic one is the one that forced me to actually go back and read more and realize that I am at risk of being a moral entrepreneur. I am at risk of being someone who's so certain he's right that he's going out making people afraid. And so I have sometimes had to check myself. And we do, in all the documents we create and all the research documents, we always seek out the other side. We literally seek out, what's all the evidence we can find on the other side? So that is a very fair critique, that I'm at risk of fomenting a moral panic. So if I'm right about the size of this problem, then it's completely appropriate for us to panic, or at least act as though we... But if I'm wrong, then I will go down in history as a fool who caused a lot of damage. 10 years from now, I don't think we're going to look back on this and say, can you believe we once thought that kids spending 10 hours a day lying on their side swiping through TikTok was bad for them? Oh my God, were we silly.
Like I said, I'm with you. But surely there is some good screen time. Or would you explain how you see there sort of being a spectrum between bad screen time and good screen time? That's been really helpful to me in my own parenting.
Yeah. Yes. So here's a couple of key principles. One principle to keep your eye on is that stories are good things. Humans are a storytelling species. We've always raised our kids in stories. We now know, now that we have LLMs, we kind of know, like, you have to feed the LLM, like, huge amounts of stuff, and then it gets smart. Well, that's what education always was. That's what a liberal arts education always was. Let's feed kids lots of novels and poems and movies and, even cartoons would count, of characters moving through a moral world, thousands and thousands of them. So if you want your kids to see stories, especially long stories, if you want to put on a movie, a 2-hour movie that they're going to watch over 2 or 3 days, that's great. It's a story. It's a relatively big screen. It's not a touch screen. They're not interacting with it. They pay attention for a long time. So stories are good. What's really, really bad is short videos, and that's where it all ends up. That's the most addictive, pointless, no stories, degrading stuff, violence, sex. TikTok, YouTube Shorts. So beware about YouTube, because it often ends at YouTube Shorts and really just awful stuff. That's one principle. The other is dopamine. You want your kids to be immersed and engaged in a story. That's not dopamine. That's engagement in a story. It's imagination. You don't want companies to be able to trigger dopamine on the schedule that they choose. So that means be very wary of touchscreen devices and video games. Some video games are good. They're not focused on addiction. But the main principle to keep in mind is that we're a biological species, we're hunter-gatherers, and the closer you can get your kid to a hunter-gatherer childhood, where they're spending a lot of time outdoors, choosing risks and adventures, the more time you can give them outdoors with other kids interacting, the better. And so, a half hour, an hour a day for kids who are 5 to 10 is probably going to be fine. So in moderation, good screen time is fine, but what most of our kids are getting is no moderation, quick videos.
Yeah, sitting there with the headphones on, neck down, gaming is really different than Friday night movie night with your kids on a couch.
Yes, family movie night is great.
There's a big equity issue here, too, because for a lot of families, the phone is the babysitter. They can't afford the extra childcare. They've got to work. They don't have access to childcare. So how do we respond to this in a way that acknowledges those realities?
Yeah, and I want to point out that, we thought this was an equity issue in the 1990s when computers were coming in, and the rich kids had a computer. And a lot of philanthropists stepped up, and I don't know if Bill Gates was a leader, but we have to get computers for poor kids. This is an equity issue. Well, it turns out that the people who made the technology were doing everything they could to keep their kids from using it. It turns out that rich kids and people in tech, their kids have a lot of protections, a lot of limits. They don't have a lot of exposure. So it turns out that the equity issue is not giving the kids these devices, it's protecting them from it. And as Olivia's question brings out, families that have a lot of resources and can pay for babysitters and have a spouse, they have a lot of resources. They don't have to give the electronic pacifier. But if you're a single mom with 3 kids and you're working and childcare is patchy, if you just give the kid an iPad, he'll be quiet for a couple of hours and you can go do things. So it is a huge equity issue that kids in the lower half, at least, of the economic spectrum are getting way too much iPad time because the parenting is hard, and the further down the economic ladder you go, the harder it is. So this is really this is an issue for all families. If we care about families, if we want kids to be raised healthy, we've got to look at it from the perspective of parents who just, it's hard for them to not give the iPad.
Oh, yeah. In Arkansas, we have now passed a bill called Bell to Bell No Cell. Mm-hmm. Chris wants you. We passed a bill called Bell to Bell No Cell, statewide effort to get phones out of the schools. But we've also paired it with some policies to support families. So better paid leave, better postpartum care. Governor Sanders passed a bill called the Healthy Moms and Healthy Babies Act. Do you see this movement gaining strength where it connects to broader pro-family policies?
Absolutely. In part because this movement has been massively driven by mothers organizing. Fathers saw the problem too, but I think what I'm seeing over and over again is mothers felt it. They felt it deep in their hearts. They felt the kids being pulled away. And what, even when my book first came out, we already had many groups of mothers, a few mothers in a town organizing, putting up a website. And so these mothers are organizing for collective action on this issue. And boy, is it going to be a natural for them to now go further, go beyond. Like, what do mothers need? And these are mostly well-to-do mothers, or at least upper half.
Yeah, who have the time to.
At the time, yeah. That's right. But these groups are so well placed. There's a group, Mama, Mothers Against Media Addiction. There are all kinds of groups that I think are going to be advocating for this. And it's also been interesting that female governors, such as Governor Sanders, Governor Hochul, have been really, really active on this. And they see not just the phone side, they see the play side too.
Yeah, and they see it as nonpartisan, pro-family stuff. What should be the response here? It's a big question. First from the policy side and then from the business side.
From the policy side, I think we need to set norms, and whether you're on the left or the right or libertarian, if you're a fan of the free market, you understand that government has to lay out ground rules to create fair and efficient markets, such as no external costs imposed on people who are not a party to the transaction, information asymmetry, monopoly, all these things. So we need government to do its job here and put in place laws to protect, to cut off these gigantic external costs. That's one of the main reasons for having governments, to help us solve these collective action problems. So policy, it should be federal. This is a national problem. We have a lot of problems in our Congress. They failed to pass a relatively simple bill. It's not transformative. It just does some basic, simple things to protect kids. COSA, Kids Online Safety Act, passed 91-3 in the Senate, totally bipartisan. Meta was able to kill it last year with selective investments in Louisiana. So we can't even pass that. Well, COSA's coming up again. We've got to pass it. If we can't pass COSA, we can't do anything. But even then, not all hope is lost, because that's just the federal government that is useless. The state governments are acting. The state governments are acting, and so is the rest of the world. So even if our federal government can be controlled by one company, the rest of the governments can't.
And how about private enterprise? I mean, do you have hope for self-regulation, or what would you like to see tech companies do? What do you think you could realistically ask for and hope for from private companies?
Let me say very clearly, the tech industry is thousands and thousands of companies, that most of which make our lives better, often a lot better. And as soon as the book came out, the CEO of Pinterest reached out to me and he said he wants to be part of the solution. And he already is. He did some great things to protect kids on Pinterest. So in AT&T, I've spoken with a number of CEOs of tech companies. They want to be part of the solution. So we're already seeing movement within tech. Now, here's my dream. That one day, companies will compete on safety. That is, in the 60s, when Ralph Nader was working, the companies, they were fighting tooth and nail to not be mandated to have seat belts and safety glass and collapsible steering columns. They were death traps, and they liked it that way. But someone predicted back then that someday car makers are going to compete on safety. And then Volvo was the first to grab that and run with it. Now everybody copied. So imagine, and if there are any entrepreneurs out there, imagine a social network that has know your customer laws. So if your children are talking to strangers online, at least the company knows who they are. So if they're sextortionists, they'll quickly get caught and banned from the platform and referred to the FBI. Whereas at present, sextortionists can, all around the world, they can get to kids, no consequences. So someday, I hope there will be a social network on which you have to do some sort of identity verification, just as you do for a bank or many other. Thank you. Let's have a round of applause for private enterprise doing this. So, I teach in a business school. I'm a big fan of free enterprise and its innovation. And if the tech industry sees that this is a massive need and most people are against them as a group, some, I think, will stand up and innovate. Oh, Tin Can. The guy who's, is he here? Who's the founder of Tin Can?
Oh.
Okay, these guys, yeah. Landlines. Get your kids landlines. Let them, Tin Can is a really great company. They make simple landlines that are very kid-friendly. So there are tech solutions.
I love that. So you've been on this long before MAHA was even a thing, but now you seem to be getting sort of a tailwind from the MAHA movement. I mean, that report had a stat that just blew my mind. It said teenagers in America, on average, are spending 9 hours of non-school time on their phone. I mean, how much more time are they actually awake? That's like the entire time they're... So how is MAHA an opportunity for you, and what would you add to it?
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. I mean, the Trump administration in general is complicated, and of course, they're very cozy with some of the tech leaders, and that causes a problem. But at the same time, some of them were actually quite supportive of COSA, and the First Lady was supportive of a bill, and Donald Trump Jr. was supportive. So the Trump administration is complicated, and RFK is complicated. So he really wants... He's really alarmed about that 9 hours a day because he's especially concerned about the EMF radiation from the phones. Okay, now, but I'll take it. Because there's so much else going on. And the MAHA platform, it's things like, how about we don't stuff our kids full of forever chemicals? Like, yes. So he's really clued in to the way that our free market system has incentivize certain companies to run as fast as they can to grab kids and addict them and harm them. And he's focused on that happening in food, but it's the exact same with big tech. So I'm actually really grateful. I'm actually very optimistic about RFK on this issue. The one pillar that I would add, I looked through the 4 pillars of what they're going to do, and I think they're pretty reasonable, most of it. And the one that I would add is attention fragmentation. That is, we have to see this as it's like a national resource that is being drained away by 3 companies, Meta, Snap, and TikTok, and Google for YouTube. So we have to see protecting our kids' ability to think, focus, and concentrate is a national emergency. And that, I think, should be a 5th pillar of MAHA.
We are winding down on time here. But give us a story, maybe one example, a community, a family that gives you hope.
Oh, sure. Okay, I'll give you 2, because one's sort of high, one low. High meaning at the national level. So my book came out in March of 2024, and it didn't come out in Portuguese until July of last year. But some mothers in Brazil got a copy of the English version and read it, and they jumped into action in April of last year, just as Sarah Huckabee Sanders did, same time. And they teamed up. There was a female legislator in Rio de Janeiro who had already proposed a phone-free school bill in Rio. And they all worked together to get that to the national government, wrote up the legislation, put it before Congress. It was approved in November. Lula signed it in December. And because their school year starts in February, it's done. I was in Brazil 6 weeks ago. All schools are phone-free. And again, that was groups of mothers coming together and jumping into action. So that's at a national level. And then at the local level, what's most touching to me is when I hear stories about communities in which now kids are riding bicycles again.
Yeah.
And so it's all the Lenore Skenazy stuff. And there was one mother wrote to me from a community outside San Francisco, another in Maine, where they formed a playborhood. About 5 to 10 families get together. After school, the kids decide, are we going to go to Jimmy's house or Susie's house? They move around. So that's happening. And those are the ones that really get my heart.
Well, as you know, we are big on trails in Bentonville, to put it lightly. And that's one of the reasons we believe in it, giving kids an opportunity to do something safe, connect with nature, a sense of independence, physical play, all those things. I want to wrap up with a little bit of a sort of rapid fire round. Jonathan, how much time do you spend on your phone?
Well, I can brag that I spend very, very little time on my phone, and I can say it's because I have no addictive apps on my phone. I don't have social media or anything like that. But the dirty secret is that I'm addicted to work, and so I'm always on one of my 5 computers. So I don't have addiction problems, like there's not a thing that's always pulling me away. But I do have focus problems. Like I'm trying to write, I get to like a hard part of the writing, and I say, I wonder how my book's doing on Amazon. I go check it because it's easier and more. But we want to know, how am I doing? That's what we all want to know, and that's what the teens want to know.
Yeah.
So I see the things in myself.
Do you read your own reviews?
Do I what?
Well, you said you're checking your status on Amazon. Do you read the reviews?
I do, actually. I'm ashamed to admit that, but at least here the reviews are all good, so it's a pleasure.
How do you get your news?
How do I get my news? I do get the daily email from a whole bunch of newspapers, the Times, the Wall Street Journal, a couple in the UK, the Times in the UK, the Economist. So I think that's a very efficient way to do it. You get one daily email, and I tell my students, shut off all notifications other than Uber, Lyft, and 5 others. You do not need to know news as it happens. That's a recipe for fragmentation and depression. So there are good ways to get it, but I think that's how I do it. That's how I do it.
What is one book besides yours that you would recommend to everyone in the audience?
Well, for an adult audience especially, the book would be Deep Work by Cal Newport, anything by Cal Newport, but especially this book, Deep Work, because he's never had social media. He's like a productivity guru. He's just very wise. I think he's a computer scientist, but he's very good psychologically. And so Deep Work really helped me to push back the tide of stuff coming in and create spaces where you can do deep, because you can't do anything big in this world if you don't have sustained attention on it. And so my students love that. I really push that on them, Deep Work. And another is the Stoic Challenge. Stoicism is especially important for young people because it's a set of ideas that are the most timeless, valuable, philosophical, and psychological insights that humanity has ever produced. And our kids are not exposed to it because it seems tough or rough. So my students love it. The Stoic Challenge by William Irvine, those 2 books, I'd say.
2 quick more runs. What's your next book?
My next book is actually The Amazing Generation, How to Find Freedom and Fun in a Screen-Filled World. It is a kid's adaptation of The Anxious Generation. Catherine Price is writing it. She's the lead author. And she wrote The Power of Fun and How to Break Up with Your Phone. And right now, we're almost at the deadline, and Lenore Skenazy is a great journalist, writer, friend, and she is editing the whole thing for us. So this will come out on December 30th. It's aimed at basically 8 or 9 years old through about 11, 12. So if you're reading the book at home, you give it to your kids, now you're all on the same page. So that's my next book.
That's great. And finally, a call to action. What is one thing we can all do differently starting today?
Call to action. Well, on a private level, it's get social media off your phone. If you have to check it, make it a weekend thing on your computer. And if it's a collective action thing, I guess I'd say buy a copy of The Anxious Generation for everyone you know who has kids under the age of 12. Yeah. Okay, I mean, that actually would spread collective action, so I'll say that.
All right, Jonathan Haidt, thank you very much.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Jonathan. That was a brilliant